Hello everybody, this is David Farrell with another music theory video. Today's video we're going to be talking about notating rhythms. We're going to talk about all the different symbols that we use in Western music to represent rhythm. So we're going to go through a bunch of things here. For the class, most of this is stuff that we've talked about in the first couple weeks, but this is a nice place that we can review it and go over it again. Quick review, of course. Rhythm is the word that we're using to relate to all the duration elements of sound. We talked about the different qualities we can use to talk about sound, and duration is one of those four core elements that describe all sounds, along with pitch, timbre, and loudness. Okay? Duration talks about how long sounds are, and rhythm sort of ties all those things in together with different relationships between the length and duration of sounds. There's another video I've already posted, a video about classifying meter that does a really nice job explaining the big picture of how rhythm is organized into beats and beat divisions and measures. If you need to review that video, I would suggest going ahead and watching it. I'll put a link to it in the YouTube notes for this one. So when we are talking about writing rhythms, which is the topic of this video, we're going to be talking about all the different symbols that we have in Western music to represent those beats, those beat divisions, okay? When we're talking about drawing notes, there's a couple of different parts of the note to review really quickly. One is the note head. The note head is that circular thing that we draw. Some notes have an open note head, like my first whole note here, or the half note right next to it. Open note heads are like a little oval that is not filled in. Some notes have a closed note head, like my 16th notes that are filled in. Some notes have a long line coming off the note head. That line we call a stem. Okay? Most of my notes here have stems. All the notes except for that very first one do. And then we have flags and or beams that we can use for some of our faster notes. Some notes have a number of different flags. Some notes just have one flag. The notes here have two flags. And when we connect a group of those notes, we can connect those flags into long flat beams, okay? It doesn't change the duration of the notes whether we draw them as flags or beams, but drawing them as beams is a little bit more common because it can show how these faster rhythmic values are grouped. We can use any of these symbols to represent beats or beat divisions when we're writing out music. What we're looking at on the screen here is some of the symbols that we can choose to use. On the left-hand side are note symbols, and on the right-hand side are rest symbols. If this diagram looks somewhat familiar to you, it's because we handed one out in class. You can download a paper version from our course Blackboard site. But in the meantime, we can talk over it very quickly. This shows the top portion of what we sometimes call the rhythm tree, the branching out from slower rhythms to gradually faster rhythms. The double whole note, the very first note that we draw, is the longest rhythm that we've got. It's an open note head with some little lines along the side of it. We don't see double whole notes too often. If we were to split our double whole note up into faster rhythms, we could split it into two whole notes. The whole note is a pretty common rhythmic value, and it's drawn simply by just using an open note head. As we keep going down the rhythm tree, each value will get twice as fast as the previous one, and so when we split our whole notes up, we can split each single whole note into two half notes. Our half note is also drawn with an open note head, but to differentiate it from the whole note, we add that stem to show us that we've got a different rhythm. And likewise, our half notes can be split into two quarter notes each. Each of our half notes divides evenly into two quarter notes. To draw a quarter note, we draw a closed note head with a stem. If we are trying to calculate different ways to divide up beats, of course, we can mix and match, and we can go down further from our rhythmic tree as well. So if we're dividing up a whole note, we could divide it into two half notes, or we could divide one whole note into four quarter notes. That's because one whole note would divide into two half notes, and each of those two half notes would divide into two quarter notes. That would give us four quarter notes. We could also divide our whole note using one half note and two quarter notes. We've got a lot of options here. On the right side, we have some of the ways we draw rests. Rests are equally important to our notes. Rests tell our players when to take a break, when to not play. Our double whole rest is a thick block that we draw between two of the lines on our staff. Our whole rest and our half rest look very similar. The whole rest is drawn hanging from a line. The half rest is drawn sitting on top of a line. And so we want to make sure we're paying attention to the difference between those because it's very easy to mix up a whole rest from a half rest. The whole rest hangs from the line. The half rest is on top of a line. It looks like a little top hat maybe. And finally, the quarter rest. The quarter rest is an odd symbol. It almost looks like a kind of a tilted Z with a little hook on the end, perhaps. Drawing quarter rests is a lot of fun, sort of, so it's something that we can practice, but it's just one of the other common rhythmic symbols that we see. This slide shows us the bottom half of our rhythmic tree as we get into progressively shorter and shorter rhythms, okay? Faster and faster rhythms. We start with our quarter notes, which is where we left off on the top of our rhythmic tree. And as you can see, we get into a whole bunch of notes that start to use flags and beams. Our quarter notes can divide into two eighth notes. We draw those eighth notes with a closed note head, with a stem, and with a single flag or a single beam. And notice that I can draw either way. I can divide my quarter note into two eighth notes and beam them, or I can divide it into two eighth notes and flag them and break the beam. It doesn't really matter. I can divide those eighth notes into two 16th notes each, and I can divide those 16th notes into two 32nd notes each. Our 16th notes have two flags or two beams. Our 32nd notes have three flags or three beams. When we are drawing rests for 8th, 16th, or 32nd notes, you can see how they're drawn. The 8th rest looks almost like a fancy little number 7 with a kind of a ball on the end there. And as we add 16th and 32nd rests, they look very similar, but you can see that we've added a little notch onto the left side of the rest for the 16th rest, and we've added two little notches for the 32nd rests. And just like up top, we can break our notes further and further down into faster rhythms. And so just as we know two eighth notes fit inside a quarter note, well, two 16th notes fit inside each of those eighth notes. So we would have four 16th notes in a quarter note. Okay? As we get into reading more and more different rhythms, we'll see more and more different combinations of these. When we're trying to figure out how to fill up a measure or how to count a rhythm, it's always nice to start at the slowest value and figure out how are we breaking it up. Our half note, which can break into two quarters, which could then break into 4/8, which then could break into 8/16 notes. Well, sometimes the more adventurous the music we encounter, the more different varieties of rhythm that we'll see. That's our basics for rhythmic notation. Now let's talk about a couple of other things that we can use to help give us more variety. The first extra thing we need to talk about is dots. When we talk about a dot, we're talking about just that, a little dot that we draw to the right of a note head. Okay? Dots modify the rhythmic value of our symbol. Dots make the note last longer. Dots add time to a duration. And specifically, a dot adds half the value of the note. A dot adds half the value of the note. That's what it means. It means play the note half again as long. And so when we look at what this means, well, a regular half note is going to break into two quarter notes. If we look at a dotted half note, we need to add half the value of that first half note. Okay? So if the half note breaks into two quarter notes, half of two quarter notes is one quarter note. And so we're adding that extra quarter note in. Okay? That's the math behind it. But what we really can shorten this to is that dotted notes are always going to divide into threes. If a regular half note divides into two quarter notes, a dotted half note divides into three quarter notes. If a regular quarter note divides into two eighth notes, a dotted quarter note divides into three eighth notes. This is really useful for writing music in compound meter, where our beats are going to be dividing into three divisions. Compound rhythm always uses dotted notes for the beats, but we can find dotted notes in any time signature. The thing to remember, they always divide into groupings of three because that dot adds half the value of a note. Another bonus topic that we can use when we notate rhythm is the tie. Ties are used to connect shorter notes into a single longer value. They're like glue that connects multiple notes together. When we're notating a tie, we draw it as an arch that connects different note heads of different notes. Ties are especially useful for writing notes that don't fit inside a single measure. If we have something that is too long to fit into a measure, then a tie can connect different notes in different measures to write it. Let's look at some examples. I've drawn a couple rhythms here for you. The first has 4 quarter notes, 4 separate quarter notes, and then it has 4 quarter notes connected as ties. The first measure we would count as 1, 2, 3, 4. Each note would be held individually. The second measure, because all 4 are tied together though, would just be one long value. It would be 1, with 2, 3, and 4 all grouped in together. Now that's not a very useful way to write ties. That's the exact same as a whole note, a symbol that we already have. But if we look at the second rhythm there, we can see a place where a tie might be necessary. You can see that I've got my 4 quarter notes, but I wanted to end my measure with a rhythmic value that was 3 quarter notes long. The problem was I didn't have enough space in my 4/4 measure to write it. And so I had to draw my note first as a quarter note, as the last beat in my 4/4 measure, and then I had to tie it to the half note of the next measure. I would count this rhythm: 1, 2, 3, 4, 3. I would have that quarter note and half note glued together into a 3-beat rhythm that runs across the bar line. This is a really common way that we might see ties used in music. Triplets and tuplets are another special topic that we have in rhythm. These let us temporarily divide beats in a way different from what the meter tells us. And triplets are the most common tuplets that we see. Triplets tell us to put 3 notes in the space where we would normally fit 2. What this means is that when we have a regular simple meter, a meter that divides, say, our quarter note beat into 2 eighth notes, well, we can temporarily pretend like it's a compound meter and put 3 divisions into our beat rather than 2. This is what triplets do. They let us temporarily break the rules. Other tuplets allow for more unusual divisions, say 5 in the space of 4 or 9 in the space of 8, but triplets are the most common, and so that's the one I'm going to spend the most time talking about. We can see the top rhythm here, again in 4/4, has some quarter notes, eighth notes, and half notes, all of these notated without triplets. You can see on the bottom line, I've notated some triplets. When I have triplets around some of my notes, I can draw a bracket like I've done in the first measure here, showing that those 3 quarter notes will be squeezed in the space where we normally have 2. You can look at the top rhythm and see that there are 2 quarter notes in the first half of my 4/4 bar, and in the bottom rhythm where I've written the triplet, I've squeezed 3 in. I've done the same with my eighth note triplets. You can see on the top there are 4 eighth notes, but on the bottom I've squeezed 3 in the space of each group of 2, and so I have 6 eighth notes there. And I can do the same with half notes. I can squeeze 3 half notes in the space of 2 half notes. Whenever you see a triplet, that's what we want to be thinking: 3 in the time of 2. One last thing to talk about here, and then we are going to be finished. We are going to talk about tempo. When we talk about the tempo of music, we're talking about how fast the beats proceed. How quickly do the beats come at us? We can measure tempo in a couple of different ways. A common way to do this is using a number of beats per minute. Okay? The number tells us how many beats we have in a minute. The more beats we have in a minute, the faster the tempo. The fewer beats we have in a minute, the slower the tempo. 60 beats per minute, for example, equals a beat every second. This is a relatively slow tempo. 120 beats per minute would be 2 beats per second. And this is a reasonably quick tempo. We can go all the way up into the high 100s or low 200s, which would be very, very fast tempos. Another way to talk about the tempo of the piece is to use one of the many, many tempo words that exist in music. There is a vocabulary list of Italian words that are commonly used as tempos in classical music. Let's take a look at some of those. There's a copy of this list of terms on our course Blackboard site. You don't need to learn all of them, but it's nice to sort of be vaguely familiar with them. You can see that they start at the very top of our screen here with very low beats per minute, 20 to 40 to 60. Those are all of our different slow tempos, and we can see the list of Italian words and their different translations. Slow, broad, solemn, stately. All of these different words are commonly found, especially in classical music, but sometimes in other forms as well, to give you an idea of the tempo range that you should be using. And as we go down the page, we can see different words that are used for moderate tempos and then fast, lively tempos that get very, very quick. All of these are different ways to talk about how fast the beats proceed. We'll talk more about these in class next time we're together. And that brings us to the end of our video. In our video today, we talked about the rhythmic symbols we use to represent beats, both notes and rests. There's a whole range of them, and they have a nice little tree of dividing into twos all the way down. We want to be comfortable with drawing these symbols and recognizing them on the page and recognizing how they relate to one another. Which ones are faster, which ones are slower, and by how much. And then we talked about some of the supplementary symbols that we can use. Dots, which help our notes divide into three by making them half again as long. Ties, which connect notes together to build longer values, especially useful when we have rhythms that don't fit into a measure. We talked about triplets, which we can use to temporarily mess with how we divide up our beats, especially in simple meters. Triplets let us divide into 3 rather than 2 for a brief moment. And we finished by talking a little bit about tempo and the different ways we can measure how fast the beats come at us in a piece of music. Thanks for watching this video. If you have more questions, don't hesitate to email me so we can talk about it. Otherwise, I'll see you next time in class. Thanks.